"You're not a real Marine. Get out of here." Someone barked, loud enough for the whole diner to hear. Then came the laughter. Sharp, mean, echoing off the windows smeared with Veterans Day posters. It wasn't the first time Franklin Ward's faded tattoo was mocked, and it wouldn't be the last. But this morning, they called it prison ink. He didn't flinch, didn't speak, just nodded at his black coffee, steady as ever, as if the insult had been said to someone else in another lifetime. Behind the counter, the young server kept snickering, elbowing his friends, while Franklin slowly reached for his cup, his sleeve rising just enough for a boy across the room to notice the ink, stare, sketch, and recognize something no one else did. 3 minutes later, the bell above the door chimed, and what followed wasn't a punch or a scolding, but 4 men in dark jackets and silent boots who froze the air with a single salute. Before this story ends, someone will stand, someone will fall silent, and a wall of old photos will rise where shame once lived. Stay with us, because some tattoos aren't ink, they're code. If you've ever believed that respect must be earned, not demanded, then write that word below. And if you still believe quiet honor deserves a place in this loud world, this is a story made for you. Franklin Ward was 73 years old, with shoulders that still held the memory of formation drills and hands, lined like old maps, calloused from work long done and never spoken of. His hair, once regulation black, had faded to silver, cropped close and neat, not out of vanity, but habit. He moved with a kind of quiet discipline that came from years of listening before speaking, of saluting before questioning. Each morning, just after 6:30 a.m., he pushed open the glass door of Grace's diner, letting the bell above ring once before fading into the hum of coffee pots and jukebox static. His coat, faded army green, threadbare at the cuffs, was always folded the same way on the booth beside him. He didn't need a menu. He hadn't in over a decade. Biscuits and gravy, black coffee, no cream. That was his order. Always. He lived alone, in a one-bedroom unit above Murphy's Market, just past the intersection where the flag on Main Street never quite unfurled right. No wife. No kids. Just silence and the habit of folding laundry with military corners, of wiping counters twice, of tucking away a letter had never opened inside the back of his wallet. Franklin had served 2 tours with the 2nd Reconnaissance Battalion in Vietnam. Bronze Star for valor, a shoulder wound that never healed right, and a tattoo on his forearm, now pale and cracked like dried riverbed skin, that meant everything to a handful of men who were no longer here to see it. To most, it just looked like ink from another life, maybe even a mistake. No one asked about it. No one asked about him. Kyle Benson, the young man behind the counter, had taken to calling it prison art when he thought Franklin couldn't hear, or worse, when he knew he could. The regulars had grown used to it, letting the comments slide between refills and bitefuls. But that morning, a boy in the corner stopped sketching for a moment, eyes fixed on Franklin's sleeve. Something in the way he stared, like he'd seen more than he should have, hung in the air longer than the steam from the coffee. Something was about to shift. The comment came louder than usual this time, loud enough to make silverware pause mid-air. "Looks like someone got that ink in prison," Kyle muttered, wiping his hands on a towel as he nodded toward Franklin's forearm. His friends chuckled too loud for the space, shoes tapping against the metal stools, one of them elbowing the other as if they'd just told the joke of the year. The tattoo had slipped a little further into view as Franklin reached for his cup. Nothing dramatic, just the ghost of a symbol, dulled and blurred by time and weathered skin. He didn't react. Not with a glare, not with a word. Instead, he adjusted the sleeve back down with quiet precision, as if shielding something sacred from the indecent. But the room had already shifted. A couple near the window looked up, then away. A woman in scrubs hesitated with her spoon halfway to her lips. No one spoke. No one interfered. Even Sarah, pouring coffee at the booth behind him, froze in motion for a beat, then moved on, silent, letting the insult hang in the air like steam from a forgotten cup. Franklin continued eating, slow, deliberate, his fork moving through the gravy like nothing had happened. The jukebox in the corner had stopped mid-song, leaving a low mechanical hum that filled the silence with something worse than noise: complicity. From across the diner, Ethan Campbell watched with narrowed eyes, his notebook pressed tight against his chest. He'd spent the night researching that tattoo, tracing it back through dusty archives and library shelves. It wasn't just ink. It was history. It was blood. It was rescue under fire. He'd seen the newspaper clipping, the one with the young corporal standing beside two officers, his eyes fierce, his posture steel. That morning, Ethan had printed the article and tucked it into his backpack, unsure why. But now he understood. He glanced toward the door, then back at Franklin. Something flickered in his stare. Not fear, not awe, but intention. And he reached down slowly, unzipping his bag. Back at the counter, Kyle smirked again. "I bet that ink's from some bar fight. Ain't no way it's military." He said it like a challenge, loud enough for the diner to hear. His voice cracked slightly at the end, but no one noticed, or maybe no one wanted to. Franklin finished the last bite on his plate, folded his napkin in half, then into quarters, and set it beside the empty cup. He reached for his coat, slid one arm in, then the other, movements precise, practiced. The entire room felt tight with something unspoken. Still, no one moved. And then, the bell above the door rang once. 4 men entered, not in uniform, but something about them stilled the air. Dark jackets, upright shoulders, eyes that swept the room like they were trained to do it. One of them, a tall man with a silver mustache and a ribbon pinned discreetly to his lapel, locked eyes with Franklin. For a breathless second, no one spoke. Then he stepped forward, his voice cutting clean through the thick air. "Permission to approach, Sergeant." And that's when the diner remembered who Franklin Ward really was. The bell above the door rang once. Soft, almost reluctant, yet the sound cut sharper than a blade. Heads turned instinctively. Conversations clipped mid-sentence, forks lowered in mid-air. Even the jukebox stalled between tracks like it too had sensed a shift in gravity. The man who stepped inside was neither tall nor loud, but the room reacted as if a general had arrived. His posture alone, upright, locked at the core, commanded the air around him. Close-cut gray hair, eyes that had seen war but refused to blink at petty men, and a jawline drawn like a boundary not to be crossed. His boots struck the tile like slow drums. His jacket, though civilian, bore the faint outline of commendation pins, once displayed with silent pride. He carried no weapon, gave no order, yet every soul in Grace's diner knew something had changed. Franklin Ward didn't look up from his booth. He didn't need to. The man paused just past the doorway, scanning the room with a glance that was not searching, but sorting. Kyle froze behind the counter, his hand halfway to a towel he no longer remembered why he held. His smirk had vanished, drained away like steam from a shattered kettle. Even his friends beside him, so loud before, sank an inch lower on their stools, their sneakers now still, their bravado quietly retreating behind lowered gazes. The man didn't say a word. He stepped forward, one slow stride at a time, toward Franklin's booth. The floor creaked once under his heel, and that creak seemed louder than any insult spoken earlier. Sarah stood frozen at the coffee station, holding a pot that had stopped pouring. Ethan, sitting on the edge of his seat, eyes wide, gripped his notebook like a prayer book. He knew, somehow, without knowing how, that this man wasn't here for coffee. When the stranger finally reached the booth, he didn't sit. He didn't even glance at Franklin at first. His eyes swept the room once more, then stopped on Kyle. That was the moment everyone held their breath. He raised one finger, almost lazily, and tapped the counter once. No rage, no command, just a signal. Then his voice, low and measured, rolled out with the weight of memory and fire. "Which one?" Franklin looked up at last, slowly, not with surprise, but with gravity. Their eyes met. No salute, no smile, just a nod. And that nod felt like the ground had shifted an inch to the left. No one needed an introduction. Everyone knew what came next. Under the soft hiss of the coffee pot and the faint hum of old fluorescent lights, the diner froze. Not in chaos, but in quiet, razor-sharp stillness. Elijah Ward took one deliberate step forward, closing the last bit of distance between himself and Kyle. There were no chairs between them, no tables, no noise. Just the raw space of confrontation. Franklin sat motionless behind them, his coffee untouched, his gaze lowered not in shame, but in trust. Everyone else had faded. Sarah stopped mid-step. The waitress in the corner held a sugar jar without pouring, and Ethan's pencil hovered inches from the page, unmoving. Kyle, still leaning against the counter with a rag in his hand, tried to laugh. It was thinner now, like a match sputtering against the wind. "What? He sent his son to fight his battles now?" he said, chuckling through the tightness in his throat. "Looks like someone's got a shiny coat but not much else under it." He looked to his buddies for backup, but they weren't laughing. One of them scratched the back of his neck. The other stared at his empty plate, like it had something worth saying. Kyle's voice faltered, only slightly, but enough for the room to hear it. Elijah didn't respond immediately. He studied Kyle, not with anger, not even with pity, but with a surgeon's precision, like he was measuring the exact weight of what came next. Then, in one single motion, he reached into his coat, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and laid it gently on the counter between them. No flourish, just a quiet placement, like setting down a loaded truth. Kyle glanced at it, half interested, half defiant, until he saw what was printed across the top. Flagstone Gazette, June 1971. A photo, faded but clear, showed a younger Franklin Ward in uniform, standing beside three men in dress blues, two of whom were now sitting silently in that very diner, their jackets still crisp, their eyes still watching. Below the photo, local hero, awarded Bronze Star for valor under fire. Second recon brings everyone home. Kyle's mouth opened slightly, then shut. The smirk dissolved. He didn't speak. His hand tightened on the rag he'd been holding, knuckles whitening. His jaw shifted, like he was trying to swallow something dry. Elijah didn't look away. He just asked, softly, like it was routine, not rhetorical. "You still think that's prison ink?" Silence. Not embarrassed silence. Reverent silence. The kind that slows time, makes walls feel closer, makes even clocks forget how to tick. Every eye in the diner was on Kyle now. No one moved. Sarah didn't blink. Ethan's chest rose and fell in shallow rhythm. Kyle didn't answer. He couldn't. His eyes shifted, once to the photo, once to Elijah, then, briefly, to Franklin, who still hadn't looked up. His grip on the rag relaxed. His shoulders slumped, just barely. And for the first time since he mocked that tattoo, Kyle looked unsure, small. And that's when everyone in the room knew he wasn't scared of the man standing in front of him. He was scared of what he hadn't seen in the man sitting quietly behind him. The silence cracked. Not with a shout or slam, but with Sarah's voice, calm and deliberate, as she slid a small remote across the counter. "Play it again," she said. The young busboy, barely 18, fumbled for a second before tapping the screen. And there it was, footage from the diner's camera. It started innocently enough. Franklin Ward stepping in, settling into his usual booth. Then the frame caught it all. Chad's sneer, Kyle leaning in with a smirk, the whispered insult, the pointing at the tattoo, the moment the gravy plate was tossed, just a little too hard, splashing like a warning shot across Franklin's shirt. Not a soul spoke. The footage looped once, then froze on a still image. Franklin, coffee in hand, unfazed, while Kyle grinned like a boy who thought cruelty was sport. Kyle tried to laugh again. "It was a joke. Just messing around," he muttered, voice trailing off into the walls. That's when Elijah stepped forward. No words, no posturing. He simply reached into his jacket and placed a weathered envelope on the counter, laying it flat like a declaration. The seal of the Department of Defense glinted under the ceiling light. Sarah opened it slowly. A hush swept through the room as she read. Staff Sergeant Franklin Ward, 2nd Reconnaissance Battalion, Bronze Star for Valor, under enemy fire. Kyle blinked, shifted, then started. "That's not. I didn't know," but the words stuck in his throat like gravel. His hands fidgeted at his sides, looking anywhere but at the faces now locked onto his. Then came the final blow. Quiet but undeniable. Officer Reynolds, who had been seated unnoticed near the jukebox since dawn, rose from his booth. The badge clipped under his civilian jacket caught the light as he walked forward. "Kyle Briggs," he said, not unkindly, but with the weight of justice behind every syllable. "Step outside. We need to talk." Kyle froze. His mouth opened, but nothing came. The bravado that had carried his laughter earlier now withered in the space between him and the counter. He looked to Chad, but the boy had already stepped back, head bowed, silent. Even Ethan, notebook still clutched to his chest, shifted in his seat with a clenched jaw. No one defended him. Not this time. Someone near the window whispered, "We just let it happen." And for a second, it echoed louder than any shout. Kyle walked out slow, like a man carrying weight for the first time. The bell above the door jingled one last time, dull and final. And just like that, he was gone. Franklin hadn't moved, hadn't said a word. But as sunlight spilled across the diner floor, catching the curve of the ink on his forearm, the room no longer saw a faded tattoo. They saw the truth it carried. And the silence that once ignored it now stood at attention. The door had barely stopped swinging from Kyle's exit when the stillness settled back over Ellie's diner. Not as tension now, but something quieter, heavier. No one moved. The air was thick with memory, with everything that hadn't been said over the years and everything that finally had. Then, slowly, like a ripple breaking the surface, someone stood. It was Sarah. She didn't speak. She just walked over to Franklin's table and placed a clean napkin beside his untouched coffee. Her hand lingered for a moment, then retreated. Her eyes didn't rise to meet his, but the tremble in her fingers said enough. Behind the counter, Chad, who had laughed too loud just hours before, wiped at a spot that didn't need cleaning. Then, quietly, he stepped around the bar and approached the booth. He didn't say much. Just, "Sir, if you ever need a meal here, it's on us." His voice cracked mid-sentence, and he stepped back just as quickly, ashamed not by what he'd said, but by how long it had taken to say anything at all. Others followed. Ethan, the boy with the notebook, stood beside his seat, clutching the leather-bound pages to his chest like a shield. "Mr. Ward," he said, his voice barely louder than a breath, "I didn't know." Then, gathering the weight of something too big for his age, he added, "I should have said something." Franklin still hadn't spoken. He looked at no one, answered no question. His gaze remained fixed on the window, where the wind outside bent the flag on the pole ever so slightly. Red, white, and worn. A man from a corner booth, someone Franklin had never met, stood up. Vietnam pin on his cap. "Darrai Town." He walked over and extended a hand. Franklin didn't shake it, but he nodded. And somehow, that nod said more than 100 handshakes ever could. No one applauded. No one took photos. But something had shifted. Deep, quiet, irreversible. The cook, stepped out from the kitchen. The woman near the window whispered, "We forgot who we were." A chair was pulled out near Franklin's booth, not to sit, but just to be closer. And still, he didn't speak. Until, at last, he reached into his coat, pulled out an old dog tag, and laid it gently on the table beside his cup. His voice, when it came, was calm, like gravel under soft wind. "I didn't come here to remind you who I was. I came to remember if this place still could be what it once meant." Outside, the wind caught the flag again, and this time, it flew just a little straighter. And inside, without permission or plan, everyone simply stayed. Because no one wanted to be the first to leave the room that might finally be healing. The booth near the window still held the same soft light every morning. Just a little warmer now. Ellie's Diner hadn't changed its menu, hadn't painted its walls, hadn't made a speech. But someone had replaced the small flag in the corner. Fresh. Folded just right. And above the counter, between the old Route 66 sign and the faded jukebox chart, now hung a black and white photograph in a simple wooden frame. Franklin Ward, standing straight in his uniform, younger, eyes set forward like he was already watching over something bigger than himself. It wasn't management who put it there. It was Ethan, the boy with the notebook, who returned one afternoon with the picture and asked Sarah quietly if it could stay. No one objected. No one even asked why. It just belonged. A shadow box appeared beneath it a week later. Inside, a Bronze Star replica, a patch from 2nd Reconnaissance Battalion, and a printed card with no headline. Just words. Honor is what you do when no one remembers. Dignity is what remains when they finally do. Franklin never mentioned any of it. He still came in every Thursday morning, same seat, same coffee, same silence. But people noticed how the air shifted when he walked in. Less noise, fewer phones out, more people standing straighter. The respect wasn't declared. It was understood. It spread. A student from the local high school interviewed Sarah for a history project. That project became a video. The video turned into a school assembly. And, at that assembly, every senior stood when Franklin entered the room. No one told them to. They just knew. One afternoon, a woman approached him. Mid-30s, civilian clothes, military posture. She didn't ask for a story. She just said, "I heard about you. My son's enlisting. I want him to know who he's following." Franklin didn't respond right away. He simply looked at her, then nodded once. That was enough. Outside the diner, someone had planted new flowers near the flagpole. Red de row, white dot row, blue dow. The soil still soft, the petals still opening to the wind. No plaque, no announcement, just color rooted in memory. And on one quiet Thursday, as Franklin reached for his coffee, Ethan slid a notebook across the table. Not filled with doodles anymore. This time, it was typed, printed, bound. Title: The Man at Table 9. The first page read, "Based on silence, verified by courage." Franklin read it for a while, then closed it gently, and smiled, not wide, but full. A man who had been forgotten, now remembered not with noise, but with depth. And on the wall, under the frame, sunlight caught the edge of the metal just right, just enough to reflect into the room like a quiet echo of something sacred, still alive. Under the old elm tree behind Monroe Middle School, the history teacher placed a weathered photo on the whiteboard, not as part of the curriculum, but as a story worth remembering. A student had brought it in, printed from a local newspaper. Franklin Ward, standing outside Ellie's Diner, his back straight, one hand over his heart as the flag was raised that morning. No one told the kids to listen, but they did. Quiet, eyes steady. One boy even saluted without thinking. Down the street, at Jensen's barbershop, an Army veteran, who once grumbled about these soft kids today, now stopped mid-shave to say, "That man? He made me sit up straighter." No one argued. They just nodded. It wasn't about war stories. It was about presence, a kind that echoed through quiet gestures and long silences. The Sunday sermon at the town's chapel didn't mention Franklin by name, but the pastor's voice grew softer when he said, "Sometimes God sends reminders wrapped in wrinkles, medals, and silence." In the front pew, a young man removed his cap, not out of habit, but out of something deeper. At the library, someone pinned a handwritten quote on the bulletin board. "Some men don't speak loudly. They don't have to." Below it, someone had drawn Franklin's silhouette, cap and all. It wasn't perfect, but it felt right. Elijah never told the full story either. He didn't have to. A look, a nod, a worn photo in his wallet. Those were enough. And when someone asked, he'd simply say, "He was my father." Like that sentence held an entire book behind it. In high school lunchrooms, in mechanic garages, even in coffee shops where the old and young rarely mixed, Franklin's name started to carry weight. Not reverence, not worship, just understanding. As if saying, Frank was enough to make people pause, take stock, and maybe, just maybe, choose kindness over pride. The boy from the diner, Ethan, now spoke at his school's assembly. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He just said, "He never told me to stand up straighter. But when he walked by, I just did." And that was the loudest thing in the room. Outside the diner, the new flag rustled clean in the wind. A smaller one sat folded in a case inside, Franklin's old one, with the stitching worn from years of holding. No plaque, no fanfare, just quiet endurance. And across the country, a military forum reposted his photo with the caption, "If you know, you know." Somewhere, a boy raised a flag in his backyard. Somewhere else, a girl helped a veteran cross the street. Not for a selfie, but because it was right. These things didn't make headlines, but they carried further than most stories ever could. And behind the diner window, Franklin's seat remained empty that afternoon. But the shadow of it lingered, just enough to remind people what silence, honor, and presence can still teach, long after the voice has stopped. The afternoon sun poured amber light through the diner windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Franklin Ward stood beneath the flag outside, back straight, eyes steady, while the whole street paused. No phones, no voices, only silence. Behind him, the same booth stayed empty, a folded flag resting on the seat where he once sat. No one touched it now, not out of fear but respect. Elijah stood nearby, arms crossed, watching as a young boy slowly removed his cap and whispered something to his father. The wind picked up, brushing the flag to life. Franklin looked toward the boy and said, not loudly, but clear, "Dignity isn't in the medals. It's in the weight you carry without asking anyone to notice." He turned and walked down Main Street. Nobody followed. Nobody spoke. But every head bowed as he passed. Later that week, beneath the flag, someone carved 4 words into a wooden bench. "This seat stays empty. If that silence moved you, comment dignity to honor the ones who walk quietly. And if you still believe quiet strength deserves to be remembered, you know where to stay."